Most men lose their value without even realizing it. Not because they are weak, but because they reveal too much. There are certain truths a man should never expose, certain emotions he should never place in someone else's hands. The world rewards mystery, but punishes desperation. And the terrifying part is this. The moment a man becomes completely understood, he often becomes easy to replace. Women rarely say it out loud, but they can feel when a man has surrendered his emotional power. In this video, you will discover the 5 things a man should never reveal. Because once these secrets leave your mouth, the relationship is never the same again. A man's deepest insecurities are rarely visible in the beginning. They hide behind confidence, humor, silence, ambition, and sometimes even kindness. But the moment he begins exposing every fear living inside him, something subtle starts to change. Not instantly, not dramatically, quietly, almost invisibly. At first it feels harmless. He believes honesty will create connection. He thinks if he reveals every wound, every self-doubt, every fear of not being enough, he will finally be understood. And for a short time it may even seem to work. She listens carefully, she comforts him, she tells him he can trust her. But human psychology is far darker and more complicated than most people realize. People are naturally drawn toward emotional stability, toward certainty, toward those who appear capable of carrying their own inner chaos. The moment a man places all of his hidden fears into someone else's hands, he unconsciously changes the dynamic. Instead of being perceived as grounded, he slowly becomes emotionally dependent on validation. And the dangerous part is this: insecurity spreads silently. A man who constantly speaks about his fear of rejection eventually starts searching for reassurance in every small action. A delayed message becomes a threat. A change in tone becomes suspicion. A moment of distance becomes panic. His mind begins creating problems that never existed before. He no longer sees reality clearly because insecurity distorts perception like poison inside water. What once looked like love slowly transforms into emotional pressure. Most men never notice the exact moment respect begins fading, because it rarely happens through arguments or betrayal. It happens through repeated emotional exposure, through constant confessions of weakness, through making another person responsible for emotions they were never meant to carry. There was a man who once believed vulnerability would save his relationship. Every night he confessed another fear. He spoke about his childhood wounds, his fear of abandonment, his anxiety about not being good enough. He thought transparency would bring them closer. Instead, something unexpected happened. The woman who once admired his calm presence slowly became emotionally distant. Not because she hated him, not because she lacked empathy, but because his fear became the center of the relationship. Every conversation began revolving around reassurance. Every disagreement became emotional collapse. Over time, she stopped seeing him as someone emotionally grounded and started seeing him as someone emotionally fragile. And fragile things create tension. One evening, during a small argument, she finally said the sentence he never expected to hear. "You make me feel responsible for your happiness." That sentence destroyed him because he realized something terrifying. The more he tried to hold on to the relationship through emotional exposure, the more he pushed it away. This does not mean a man must become cold, emotionless, or fake. Silence alone is not strength. But there is a difference between emotional honesty and emotional surrender. A strong man understands that not every fear deserves to be spoken aloud repeatedly. Some battles must be handled internally before they are placed onto another person's shoulders. The human mind instinctively trusts those who appear capable of controlling themselves under pressure. This is why mystery creates attraction. This is why emotional discipline creates respect. And this is why uncontrolled insecurity slowly destroys both. The world teaches men to reveal everything, to empty every thought, every wound, every fear into the open. But the truth is more uncomfortable. Some emotions lose power when mastered privately and become dangerous when exposed carelessly. Because once a person sees that your entire emotional state depends on their approval, they begin to understand how much control they truly have over you. And from that moment forward, the balance is never completely the same again. Fear has a strange way of revealing itself, not always through words, but through behavior, through over-explaining, through chasing, through the silent panic a man feels whenever he senses distance from the woman he loves. And the moment that fear becomes visible, something inside the relationship begins to shift. A man who fears losing a woman often believes he is protecting love. In reality, he is slowly surrendering his peace, his confidence, and eventually his dignity, because fear changes the way a man behaves. It makes him abandon his natural calm and replace it with emotional urgency. At first, the signs are almost invisible. He starts replying too quickly. He overthinks small changes in her mood. He needs constant reassurance that everything is fine. If she becomes quiet for a few hours, his mind begins imagining betrayal, rejection, or abandonment. And without realizing it, he starts acting from fear instead of self-respect. This is where emotional power quietly disappears. The more terrified a man becomes of losing someone, the more he unconsciously communicates one dangerous message. My happiness depends entirely on you. And once another person feels that level of dependence, the balance changes forever. Because people naturally value what feels difficult to control. A man who cannot emotionally survive without someone creates pressure instead of attraction. His fear becomes heavy. Every conversation carries hidden anxiety beneath it. Every disagreement feels catastrophic. Love slowly stops feeling free and starts feeling like responsibility. And nothing destroys desire faster than emotional suffocation. There was once a man who built his entire world around one woman. He stopped focusing on his ambitions, his routines, even his friendships. Everything revolved around keeping her close. He constantly checked if she was upset. He apologized for things that were not even his fault. He became terrified of disappointing her because deep inside he believed losing her would destroy him completely. For a while, she stayed, but over time, she noticed something disturbing. The man she once admired for his confidence was disappearing. In his place stood someone constantly seeking reassurance, constantly afraid, constantly emotionally exhausted. The relationship no longer felt balanced. It felt like she was carrying the emotional weight of two people. One night, after another argument fueled by his fear and overthinking, she looked at him with sadness and said, "I feel like you're always scared I'll leave." He denied it immediately, but the truth was written into every action he took. And eventually, the very fear he tried so desperately to avoid became reality. Not because he lacked love, but because fear slowly transformed that love into emotional pressure. This is the painful contradiction most men never understand. The harder you try to force someone to stay, the faster they begin wanting space. The more terrified you become of abandonment, the more unstable your energy becomes. Fear destroys presence. It destroys calmness. It destroys the quiet confidence that creates emotional security in the first place. A strong man understands something uncomfortable. No person should become the center of his emotional survival. Love should add meaning to life, not become the only reason life feels meaningful. The moment a man forgets this, he places himself into emotional captivity. True confidence is not pretending you do not care. It is knowing you can survive loss without losing yourself. Because the man who fears losing a woman will sacrifice his peace to keep her, while the man who respects himself understands that no relationship is worth abandoning his emotional stability for. And strangely enough, the less a man fears abandonment, the more powerful his presence becomes. Not because he is cold, but because he is no longer controlled by panic. He no longer chases reassurance. He no longer collapses emotionally at the thought of distance. He stands calmly in uncertainty. And in a world full of desperate people, that kind of emotional control becomes unforgettable. The past is dangerous because it never truly disappears. Even when buried, it remains hidden beneath the surface, shaping reactions, fears, habits, and the way a man sees himself. Most men carry memories they rarely speak about. Failures, humiliations, betrayals, moments that quietly damaged their confidence. And sometimes, in the name of honesty, they reveal every broken piece too quickly. Believing transparency will create intimacy. But some wounds lose their power only when they are healed privately. The problem is not having a painful past. Every human being carries darkness inside them. The problem begins when a man allows his past to become his identity. When every conversation slowly turns into a confession of old failures, old heartbreaks, old weaknesses, instead of showing growth, he unknowingly keeps reliving the same pain over and over again. And people can feel that energy. A man who constantly speaks about how badly he was betrayed begins to appear emotionally trapped inside that betrayal. A man who repeatedly talks about how weak, rejected, or broken he once was unconsciously forces others to see him through that same lens. The mind remembers repeated emotions more than facts. Eventually, people stop seeing who he is becoming and only see the wounded version he continues feeding. There is something unsettling about a person who never escapes their past. At first, sympathy appears. People listen. They comfort, they try to understand. But over time, repeated emotional exposure creates a hidden shift. Instead of respect growing stronger, emotional attraction slowly weakens. Because unresolved pain creates emotional heaviness, and heaviness changes the atmosphere of every relationship. There was once a man who met a woman during the lowest point of his life. In the beginning, she admired his honesty. He told her about every failure he had experienced, the friends who betrayed him, the woman who destroyed his confidence, the years he wasted feeling invisible and lost. He believed complete openness would make her trust him more. But something unexpected happened. Months later, during arguments, his past kept returning into the relationship like a shadow. His old insecurities shaped his reactions. His fear of betrayal made him suspicious. His fear of failure made him overly defensive. Without realizing it, he had never actually escaped the pain he spoke about so often. One evening, after listening to him relive the same emotional wounds again, she quietly asked him, "Do you ever stop living in the past?" That question haunted him because deep inside, he realized she was right. He had spoken about healing far more than he had actually healed. This is why emotional discipline matters. A strong man does not deny his past, but he refuses to become imprisoned by it. He understands that constantly exposing old wounds can slowly reopen them. Not every painful memory deserves repeated attention. Some experiences should become lessons, not permanent identities. The world often glorifies endless emotional exposure, as if repeating pain automatically creates healing. But repetition without growth only strengthens emotional weakness. A man who constantly revisits his darkest moments eventually starts rebuilding his entire personality around suffering. And suffering can become addictive. There is power in silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of mastery. The ability to carry painful experiences without needing constant validation for them. The ability to move forward without turning every relationship into therapy for unresolved wounds. Because the truth is uncomfortable, people admire resilience more than damage. They respect transformation more than repeated confession. And while vulnerability can create connection, uncontrolled emotional exposure can slowly destroy the image others hold of you, especially when it reveals that the past still controls your present. A man's scars should remind him of survival, not become evidence that he is still emotionally bleeding. Because once a person realizes your past still owns your mind, they begin to understand how fragile your inner world truly is. And from that moment, they no longer see strength. They only see the wounds you never learned to leave behind. Desperation is one of the few emotions people can feel before a single word is spoken. It hides inside the tone of a voice, the speed of a reply, the constant need for attention, the silent fear of being ignored. And the tragic part is this: the more desperate a man becomes for love, validation, or emotional reassurance, the more invisible his value slowly becomes. Because this desperation does not create attraction. It destroys it. A man who craves constant attention unknowingly places himself beneath the people he seeks approval from. His mood depends on replies, reactions, compliments, and affection. If he receives attention, he feels alive. If he is ignored, he collapses internally. Without realizing it, he hands over control of his emotional state to someone else. And once another person feels that level of control, the balance changes immediately. At first, desperation often disguises itself as care. A man texts constantly because he wants to feel important. He gives endless attention because he fears being forgotten. He becomes available every second of the day because silence terrifies him. Deep inside, he believes that if he gives enough energy, enough affection, enough validation, he will finally become impossible to leave. But human psychology rarely works that way. What feels rare becomes valuable. What feels overly available slowly loses emotional impact. When a man appears desperate for connection, people subconsciously stop fearing his absence. And when your absence no longer matters, your presence loses power too. There was once a man who believed love meant constant pursuit. Every morning he sent long emotional messages. Every small moment of distance filled him with anxiety. If a woman became cold for a few hours, he immediately tried harder. More attention, more compliments, more emotional effort. For a while, he thought he was being loyal. But slowly, the relationship began suffocating under the weight of his neediness. Conversations no longer felt natural because every interaction carried hidden pressure. Every silence felt dangerous to him. Every delay felt personal. The woman he loved started feeling emotionally exhausted without fully understanding why. One night, after he spent hours demanding reassurance about her feelings, she finally admitted something painful. "I feel like nothing I give you is ever enough." That sentence shattered him because he realized his desperation had created an emotional void that could never truly be satisfied. The more attention he received, the more attention he needed. Like thirst growing stronger with every sip of water, this is the dark nature of emotional dependence. A desperate man does not seek love alone. He seeks emotional survival through another person. And that level of dependence creates fear, pressure, and instability. Instead of standing confidently in his own life, he begins orbiting around someone else's approval. People may sympathize with desperation, but they rarely feel deeply attracted to it because desperation signals scarcity. It tells the world a man does not feel complete within himself. It reveals that his confidence can be controlled through attention, affection, or validation. And once someone understands they control your emotional state, they unconsciously lose respect for your independence. A strong man enjoys love without becoming enslaved by it. He appreciates attention without needing constant reassurance to feel worthy. His emotional state does not collapse because of temporary distance or silence. He remains grounded within himself. This is why emotional control feels powerful, not because it is cold, but because it is calm. A man who is not desperate moves differently. He does not chase endlessly. He does not beg for validation. He does not panic when attention disappears for a moment. He understands that self-respect is more valuable than temporary emotional comfort. And strangely enough, people are often drawn toward those who are capable of walking away emotionally whole. Because in a world filled with emotional hunger, the rarest thing is not love. It is someone who does not desperately need it to feel complete. There is a dangerous moment in many relationships that most men never recognize when it happens. A moment where love slowly transforms into emotional dependence. Where a man no longer wants a woman in his life, he needs her in order to feel alive. And once that happens, he unknowingly places his entire emotional world into someone else's hands. At first, it feels beautiful. He thinks about her constantly. Her attention becomes the best part of his day. Her voice calms him. Her presence gives meaning to everything around him. Slowly, without realizing it, his happiness begins revolving around one person alone. If she is close, he feels complete. If she becomes distant, his entire emotional state collapses. This is how emotional dependence begins, quietly. A man who becomes completely dependent on a woman often loses himself without noticing. His routines disappear, his ambitions weaken, his peace becomes unstable. Every emotion he feels starts depending on her behavior. A simple change in tone can ruin his entire day. A delayed message can create anxiety. Her approval becomes more important than his own self-respect. And the terrifying part is this: once another person realizes they control your emotional stability, the relationship is never truly equal again. Because dependence creates fear. The dependent man fears silence, distance, disagreement, rejection, and abandonment. He begins avoiding conflict just to keep the connection alive. He tolerates disrespect he once would have walked away from. He suppresses his true feelings because losing the relationship feels more terrifying than losing himself. This is how emotional captivity is created. There was once a man whose entire world revolved around one woman. In the beginning, his love felt intense and passionate. He cancelled plans just to spend more time with her. He ignored his own goals because being around her felt more important than building his future. Slowly, his life became smaller while his emotional attachment became larger. One evening, she went out with friends and stopped replying for a few hours. For most people, this would have been normal, but for him, it felt unbearable, his mind filled with panic, overthinking, and fear. He checked his phone constantly. He imagined betrayal. He imagined abandonment. By the time she finally replied, he was emotionally exhausted, angry, and desperate for reassurance. That night, she looked at him differently, not with hatred, not with cruelty, but with the quiet realization that this man could no longer emotionally function without her. And from that moment, the energy between them changed forever, because people naturally respect those who can stand on their own emotionally. Independence creates stability. Dependence creates pressure. When a man makes another person responsible for his inner peace, he slowly turns love into emotional obligation, and obligation suffocates connection. This does not mean a man should avoid attachment or pretend not to care. Real strength is not emotional coldness. The strongest people are capable of love without losing themselves inside it. They remain connected while still maintaining identity, purpose, and emotional control outside the relationship. A man should never allow one person to become the entire foundation of his emotional existence, because humans are unpredictable. People change, relationships shift. And if your entire sense of self depends on someone staying forever, your peace becomes fragile by definition. The most powerful men are not those who love the least. They are the ones who can love deeply without surrendering their identity, discipline, and emotional stability. They understand that attachment becomes dangerous the moment it replaces self-respect. And ironically, the less dependent a man becomes, the more calm, confident, and attractive his presence feels. Because he is no longer chasing emotional survival through another person. He stands complete on his own. And that kind of emotional strength is something very few people ever truly master.